Hello, you're watching Dukescopy TV and I'm Natalie MacDonald. Now, since the financial crash in 2007, the banking industry has been under intense scrutiny in the media. Here to talk to me today about the changing image of the banks in the media is Dr. Rebekah Jorgensen from Webster University. Rebekah, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for the invitation.
Now, what has been the catalyst in change in how the banking industry is choosing to engage with the media?
I think the key catalyst in change was obviously Occupy Wall Street movement, at least in the United States. And in that respect, it came about a little bit as a surprise. Obviously, there were things happening before the Occupy Wall Street movement that started it, the mortgage crisis and those kinds of issues, the student loan crisis. But Occupy Wall Street, the combination of people who were engaged in questioning bank practices had never been done in that way before, and part of what allowed that to happen was the social media.
You mentioned that social media. How much are banks now using social media, and more importantly, is it working?
Well, let me go back to just what happened in the Occupy Wall Street component. Before that time, there had never been the possibility of having that interactivity from the user, both being able to receive a message and then in turn transfer it on. There was also the issue of global ability, so that all of a sudden, instead of a small community, the message could be transferred across a nation or across a world. And then there was the issue of demassification. In other words, no longer are there just three sources of information about what's going on. There's thousands, and each one of us can be a source. So what happened is, in the beginning, I think this caught a lot of the banking industry by surprise with the vehemence of how people were communicating their dissatisfaction with services. In retrospect, it took a little while for them to catch on to it, but once they did start to catch on to how the social media were really changing the way that people were thinking about and using banking in other industries as well, they have now started to use it more effectively to also promote their interests and to change their point of view.
But you also have, not only does it promote their interests, but it provides immediate feedback. Naturally, that can be a bit scary for the banks as well.
Traditionally, I think the banks are not only in this, not the only ones in this position. Almost any service industry has now borne the wrath of the social media, the fact that people can immediately say, well, I'm not happy about this, and it doesn't just go away. It's not just like a protest that's out on a street and then suddenly it's over. The nudging or the continuous dissatisfaction continues to be transmitted among parties, and so therefore a responsive bank will say, okay, let's address these, and I want you to be aware that we are addressing them, and they'll use the social media to also send back a message that we're listening to you, we hear what you have to say, and I believe this represents a paradigmatic shift for the bank. They're really changing the method of dealing with the client. We saw this start in Los Angeles, and it's continuing, of course, to this day.
But how much then is the media itself changing the image of banks? You know, central bankers are now not only more in the public eye, but you also, this idea that they are now accountable to the public has been bred. Is that sort of a construct of the media, or do you think it's just natural progression, really, given sort of the previous events?
I think what happened, in answer to your question, what happened in Occupy Wall Street indicates clearly how this is very much changed in that respect. The traditional media did not report what the public dissatisfaction was. At first, they were kind of sidelined. Nothing came on the media, on traditional media. They were considered to be a bunch of homeless people who didn't work. I mean, there was kind of a depiction of them. But then as time went on and people started doing posts about what they really felt about this, all of a sudden the traditional media, just like the traditional banks, started to see that something else was happening here that was a game change in terms of how the media were being used and how the banks in turn had to address the media. So what has happened in many cases is that there has been a trust lost in traditional banking and in traditional media, and therefore the social media have started to evolve more, and that has meant that then the banks are starting to evolve more in terms of understanding that.
Rebekah, thank you so much for coming in and sharing such an interesting topic with us.
Thank you for having me along.
For more interviews just like this, stay tuned to Dukascopy TV.